Now, as a reminder, when you start this is going to be day one of a new two-day class. Hopefully, the students in your class are students you've had before already, because they should have taken already the three-day boot camp before they've taken this one. They should have. And so, with one of the main things we're going to talk about in this is ASM. That's half of the class, all of ASM. And I was trying to think of a good analogy today. I was actually going to put a slide up there, but I didn't get a chance to. I was thinking of, like, you know how you see a security guard at a mall? You know, you're at a shopping mall, there's a security guard and he's walking around and maybe has a gun. Maybe he's a little overweight. Walks around like that, you know. And half the time I think, gosh, if I grabbed that TV and ran, I don't even think he could catch me. But so there's some security there at the mall, but you know, it's not great security. It's good security, at least there's somebody there. That's similar to the security that we put in place in the two-day boot camp. In the two-day boot camp, we put together a security policy that has good signature checking for cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and then we also added file type enforcement that does brute force protection. It's good. It's very good security. But I'd rather think about the other individual, somebody over fighting in combat in maybe one of our Afghanistan somewhere, and they've got full Kevlar armor, everything's covered. They got really high, powerful weaponry. Very different from our security guard in the mall. They're both security folks. That's their job. But the level of security that they provide is very different. So today, when we're done, we're going to have an ASM policies that are more similar to this guy, our high-trained security professional out in the combat. That's where we're headed throughout the day. So these are the 2 days we're going to be doing today, and then this will be tomorrow. This is everything we're going to cover in both days. Today, we are going to cover all ASM Advanced stuff. And there's even more ASM that I'm going to talk to you guys specifically about at the end of the day. More that you can do after this. And then tomorrow we'll go into AFM, Application Advanced Firewall Manager, and then our web safe, we'll cover that tomorrow as well. So for today, we have 6 topics. The first, we're just going to make sure everybody is up to speed, caught up from what we covered in the 3-day boot camp. So we're going to do a review of the ASM concepts from Partner Boot Camp. Then we're going to cover 2 very important topics, Lesson 2 and Lesson 3. These are, in my opinion, after my experience of working with ASM for several years, these are the areas that if you want to really understand ASM, and you want to know how ASM works, you need to understand these topics. Manual versus automatic policy building, and using trusted versus untrusted requests. And then the concepts of learning, staging, and enforcement. Once you've got this foundation, then your ability to help and administer and manage ASM policies has gone up much higher. And your ability to teach it as well and explain things. Then, we just get to go in and talk about some additional features we can add. Additional security as needed. For example, brute force attacks, we want some protection. Web scraping attacks, we want protection. In Lesson 5, we cover cross-site request forgery, parameter tampering, and we can talk about how to enforce policies based on the geolocation of the request. Syria or North Korea, maybe we don't want to allow those requests. And then at the end of the day, we'll talk about how we also can add an additional ASM feature, which is our Layer 7 denial of service. So it's a pretty full day of information. And as I said, we're going to start with just some review of the ASM basics from the 2-day Partner Boot Camp. So when we have ASM security policies, as you mentioned yesterday, virtual server. That's what it's all about. So we have a virtual server for our banking application, and we have another virtual server for an intranet site. This one is obviously much more, I'm more concerned about data loss here than I am here. So we can have the security policy in place for each one of these virtual servers with varying security levels. So the red implies much more secure, and the green is not quite as secure. Maybe it's just got some signatures. Every time the request comes in, it's scanned by ASM, the security policy, against all of the settings to determine just one thing. Is this malicious? Yes or no? Is there anything malicious about it? Yes or no? The answer is yes, it's malicious, blocked. If it's not malicious, then of course it goes down to the server. And then if you choose to, you can also enable response checking. Somebody in this room yesterday had talked about all the signatures. There's so many signature sets available. We've looked at the signatures. Why not just add all the signatures? Why not add all the security available? If we've got 1,000 security options we can make available in ASM, why not just add them all? Well, the same answer might apply. Why not just take that guy from fighting in Afghanistan with all of his equipment and put him in the mall, walking around? Does that make sense? No. Yes? You want to have a super security guy walking around the mall? Maybe it's too much security for that situation. So we never want to add more security than we need. A question comes up quite often by my SEs in boot camp, and they say, does adding this with ASM, does this affect the performance of my applications? Is this going to slow down my applications? What's the first answer? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, you guys all leave, you're fired. We never say that. No, we're not going to slow down the application. We say that, it sounds bad, and in some cases it's not true. So my answer is no, we will not, because number one, these are all, what we're checking is we're blocking stuff that was normally checked back on the web server. The web server used to do all this work. We're just now doing it on BIG-IP, which is faster. Faster to check all this. And the fact that we are going to be blocking many attacks that would have taken down or slowed down the web server, we're blocking those. That's ensuring our web servers stay up more often. We have to take that into consideration. But most importantly, it's your responsibility, it's your partner's responsibility, it's my SE's responsibility to make sure that when they go out and they talk about BIG-IP and applications, that they have sized the customer's environment properly. So they're not putting them on a BIG-IP 1600 because it's a quick sale and it's not going to give them good performance. People ask about sizing all the time. I can't give you sizing guidelines. A lot of our SEs can't give sizing guidelines. It's a science. It's not a very simple spreadsheet. But the rule of thumb is, I have to sit down and say, okay, how many applications do you have? 10, 50, 100? For each application, how much of our services do you want? Network firewall, authentication, authorization, layer 7 denial of service, application security? How much of our services do you want? And how much usage do you expect from these applications? Oh, your banking, you're going to have thousands of requests per second. Your website, tens of thousands of requests. All of that factors into sizing. That's why it's not easy to have an answer. But the key is, you always want to make sure you've planned ahead of time so that they are on the right BIG-IP for the situation, which ensures their application performance won't suffer. Now that's my answer. The true answer is yes, of course, everything we add security-wise has an impact. Back at my corporate office, we have badges to get in to the doors. That's our only form of security, to get in. But imagine if F5 said, okay, now, after you come in, you have to show your badge to the guard that's at the front. and then you have to put your thumbprint down, and then you've got to look in to do your eye scan. All these layers of security, what is that going to do to my employees? How is that going to affect my employees? How is that going to affect my employees? I like audience interaction. Easy answer. It's going to slow them down. It's going to take them longer to get into work. And so we're going to probably get less work out of them. So I had to ask myself, but did I really need all that? Did I need thumbprint? Or was I just adding it because it was available? So every time we add more security, there's always going to be an impact. That's just the way of life. That's the true answer. But what we say is, no, it doesn't slow it down, because we know we have you on the right BIG-IP to handle all of your needs. All right? So I wouldn't necessarily share that unless somebody asks you that same very question. Does this affect my performance? The answer is always no. And then explain why. All right, so same thing with response checking. We don't always need response checking. Don't add response checking if it's not necessary. Just adds more overhead. Then we also have all these different options for security policies. Each security policy can have a variety of security options. Some of the default options, protocol compliance, valid methods, and attack signatures, these are usually part of every security policy. You're always going to find these as sort of your baseline package of settings. But then, based on the application itself, we can start adding additional stuff like file type enforcement. This is what they did in their exercise 2 of the 3-day partner bootcamp. But we can also add things like parameter, request link, parameter enforcement, URL enforcement, brute force, web scraping, CSRF, parameter tampering, geolocation, layer set announcers, a long list of things. Now this list may look familiar because this is the list of stuff that we will cover throughout the whole day of this class. So these are all additional security options we can add. We don't have to, but we can if the application expects it or needs it. In other words, if this is my banking site and I'm suffering from brute force attacks, well, obviously we want to add brute force protection. It's a no-brainer. We have to. So the options you guys looked at yesterday, or excuse me, the options they looked at in the 2-day partner bootcamp for creating the security policy, they looked real briefly at using these out-of-the-box templates for things like Outlook Web Access and SharePoint. The benefit of using these is ASM already knows a lot about these applications. It knows the application, it knows the URLs, it knows forms and fields. So it's a kind of a quicker way to get started on a good security policy. But more often than not, we're dealing with custom applications that were built in-house by the company or outsourced. So then we have to use some different options. And the one they used in the boot camp is the rapid deployment. We talked about that, and it had some key benefits. Minimizing false positives. This is an important thing for customers. Very important. One of the things I hear probably the most about ASM is organizations do not want ever to block a valid user. They'll get very upset if they find out they've blocked a valid user. So we have to ensure we get that security policy to the point where we're minimizing very few false positives. There's always a chance. There's always a chance my CEO comes into work and he forgot his badge. And the security guard says, sorry, you can't come in. And they're like, excuse me? I'm the CEO. You're not going to let me in? You're fired. Well, bad false positive, not a good idea. Also important one of the important concepts to understand from the 2-day class is transparent versus blocking. 2 modes. Those are the only 2 options for a security policy. In transparent mode, nothing is blocked ever. In blocking mode, every configured malicious request is blocked. And by configured, I mean what we have configured as malicious will be blocked. It also protects against the OWASP attacks. This is what they will see at the end of exercise 1. Just by setting up this new security policy, within a minute and a half, they're already going to see SQL injection and cross-site scripting attacks getting blocked. In a minute and a half, creating a security policy. And that's partly based on the fact that it includes, by default, thousands of attack signatures, and we can also add more attack signatures if we would like to. So in the second lesson, they covered file type enforcement, creating a list of valid file types for the security policy. And what we talked about in the 2-day class is this has several benefits. It's easy to configure. Get in this list. Doesn't take very long. And it typically doesn't change much. Little ongoing maintenance. Very, very infrequent that we have a new file type we need to support. This is important to understand at this point because as we move on in this next couple of lessons, we're going to add enforcement for things like URLs and parameters, which adds another new higher level of security, but think how often new URLs are created and new parameters. That is part of a web application. They typically always are adding new functionality. So that adds more security, but does now start to require some security policy maintenance. This, very little security policy maintenance, and we get some good security for this. Good security for very little work. So that's why we recommend that. This page, when you teach the 2-day class, the 3-day class for Partner Bootcamp, and you're talking about the learning and blocking settings page, it's really important that you specify, you clarify that this is the page that all the magic happens with ASM. Almost everything that can be blocked will be configured to be blocked on this page. The other nice thing about this page, how many of you have had any experience with ASM for more than 3 years? Anybody more than 3 years? Okay. If you worked with ASM about 3 years ago, you may be aware that ASM has changed a lot in the last couple of years. Every release, it's changed a bit, which quite honestly, if I'm being honest with you, has frustrated me as a curriculum developer because every time that means I have to change my materials and get new screenshots. But our developer's goal has been to simplify ASM more. So in the process of simplifying it, they've made it a little bit frustrating for people like me, having to adapt and learn. But so for example, one example is all the things you can see on this page. Everything that's on this page, in a previous version of ASM, I think it was on 5 or 6 different pages that you had to go to do everything you can do on this one page. So this is a much more simplified page of all these settings, which is nice. And as you get to know ASM well, you'll get to know this page well. A lot of things you can do on this page. What we looked at in the 2-day class was how we enabled learning for file types. You set that to always, and then you made sure that we had these selected for illegal file type. This checkbox here is the one that ensures that any new requests come in that are not currently on the file type list will appear on the traffic learning page. That's what this checkbox means. It'll be on the traffic learning page. This checkbox means any request that comes in that does not match a list on the file type, allowed list, will have an event log entry. It'll have an event log entry, and it will be considered an illegal request. This typically is only affects transparent mode. Only when you're in transparent mode will this really be an issue. Because if a request comes in that does not match an entry in my file type list, and we're in blocking mode, and this is checked, it's going to also create a log entry, but it's not going to be an illegal log entry. It's going to be a blocked log entry, and the request will be blocked. So that's what those three checkboxes mean for each of these violations. So for every violation on this whole page, all of these that have the learn checkbox, what that means is you'll now start seeing on the traffic learning page, right here, you'll start seeing requests that came in that violated that violation. It triggered that violation. Another thing that's important to kind of understand here is I'm seeing this page here, another very important page for ASM. Probably the second most important page if you're doing a lot of ASM policy building. When you look at this list and you say, illegal file type, PHP. Well, that doesn't sound like an illegal file type. Why is it telling me that PHP is an illegal file type? Well, it's telling me that because right now I have a list. I have a list of allowed file types on the security policy, and right now, that's the only thing in the list. So right now, this is the only listed allowed file type. Anything else right now is considered illegal. So so that's why it triggers the illegal file type, that's the violation. It is technically illegal because it's not on the list. That's the process of adding items. We see what's triggering, we go, no, that's actually a real cookie. We should enforce that. So I need to accept it. That's a good file type. I need to select it and I need to accept it. That's what they did in the second exercise. They picked the valid file types that they then accepted into the policy. So this page, you're going to see all of these different entries, and as a reminder, what I just said is any violation on the learning and blocking settings page that has the learn checkbox, those violations we now may see suggestions for on this page here. So those learn checkboxes mean. Then the other last thing we talked about in the 3-day boot camp is attack signatures. What we talked about was by default about every 6 weeks we release new attack signatures. You can see if there's new ones to install if you choose to. You can also look on the learning and blocking settings page for a specific policy. Always remember you have to be looking at the correct policy. You can see which signature sets are in effect for this policy. You can go view these signature sets. There's a section in the 3-day class that I'm working on right now, the 3-day ASM class. It has a standalone attack signatures lesson. So in that lesson, they'll go in and look at signature sets, create a custom signature set, and so forth. So that'll be something you can look at later. But you can go look at signature sets and see all the signatures inside of it, create custom signature sets, and so on. These are all the ones that are currently added to the security policy. And that's pretty much a summary. And that's what people should have a fairly good concept of before we move into this.